Okay, so far we've been working on a number of things as we're looking at the research and the different processes that we go through in thinking of doing research. And some of the things that we did in our last sessions is looking at how do we write a research problem, and we have been able to do that. We've wrote it as a statement, we've wrote it as a question as well, so we've been working on that one. And then we worked on how do we write a statement of the problem, and we have been looking at that one. And what we saw yesterday is looking at how do we write a purpose statement. Okay, so now what I will be working on for us in this session will be looking at how do we write a research question. What is a research question and how do we write a research question? So when we look at a research question, basically it all begins like what we said. Your research problem is key to everything that you'll be doing in research. You need to be able to understand what is the problem that I'm trying to find a solution for. What is the problem that I'm going to be inquiring into in this research? So you need to very clearly understand what your problem is, and you will state that as a research problem. You will state it. You should be able to state it in one sentence very clearly. Now that problem is big, is broad, and you'll be asking yourself, how do I solve that problem? How do I come up with a solution for that problem? And you'll be looking at smaller sub-problems that you will be addressing in order for you to be able to address the bigger problem. And those sub-problems can actually be referred to as the research questions. Each of the sub-problems will become the sub-questions that we'll be addressing. So we have the research questions. Now, research questions, they make the research problem more specific, and it will break it down into smaller components for us. So your research problem is big, and then the research questions will break that big research problem for you into smaller components, which you will be able to address, which you will be able to answer through the whole process of your research. So it will make it specific, it will break it down into smaller components for you. Research questions provide a specific path through the research and the writing process. Having your research questions very clearly stated at the beginning is important, because your research questions will guide, again, it will guide the whole process. So you understand, you have the research problem. From your research problem, you've come up with smaller components, sub-problems or sub-questions that you will be answering. And therefore, throughout the whole of your study, what you will be basically doing is trying to answer those sub-questions that you have come up with, which we also will refer to as here as the research questions. So the research questions are the questions that you will be answering, your study will be answering. And therefore they are very important, and you want to be very careful in the selection and in the way you state your research questions. So research questions provide a specific path through the research and in the writing process. What data do I need to answer the research question? Your research question you look at the research question and you will be able to decide what kind of data do I need to be able to find a correct answer for that one. Who do I have? Who would have the data for it? So that will also guide you in terms of who would be the sample for you, the participants in your study. How do I get the data for it? What kind of data do I get it? How do I get it? How do I analyze the data? All of these ones will be determined by the research questions that you have identified. The literature review is also written describing the existing knowledge related to the research questions. So when you write your literature review also will reflect the research questions. So your research questions will also guide in the way you write your literature review, because ultimately what you want to do is at the end, when you find answers for each of the research questions, the findings for each of the research questions, you want to be able to relate them later on with your literature review. And therefore in your literature review you will have to have something related to your research questions. So your research questions will also guide the way you will be writing your literature review. Um, Writing a central research question. The central research question, this is the main essence of your study, is captured in your research problem. You state your research problem as a question, and when you do that, for the most part, that should give you your central research question. So research problem is broad. You change that one into a question, you will have the broad research question, the broad question that your research is seeking to answer. An example is this study seeks to assess the impact of pastoral leadership style on congregational care, the case of the Full Gospel Church. So if we look at this one, let's say this is the research purpose, problem that you have. This study seeks to assess the impact of pastoral leadership style on congregational care, the case of the Full Gospel Church. What is the impact? If we change this one into a question to find out what would be the central research question, what would be the broad question that this research is going to answer. So it will be, what is the impact of the pastoral leadership style on the congregational care of the Full Gospel Church? So this will be the broad central research question. This question, the central research question, is the central question, of course. The central research question is broad, and hence it needs to be broken into the sub-questions. Carefully look at the statement of the problem and the central research question, and then after that, what would be 3 to 5 more specific questions that you need to ask. So looking at your own research problem, change that into a research question, into a central research question, and then looking at the central research question, you ask yourself, what will be those smaller questions I need to ask to be able to answer my big central research question? So you need to be able to come up with the smaller research questions. Now you need to be, you need to recognize that you cannot have too many research questions, because when you have too many research questions, what that means is you must find data for each of the research questions, and then you must be able to write the findings, the analysis, and everything in relationship to each of the research questions. You can't include a research question in your proposal and not find an answer for it later on and not address it later on. So if you have a research question, you have to find data, you have to analyze it, you have to be able to report it. So the more research questions you have, the bigger will be your study. So you want to limit your number of research questions to the ones that are most significant to your study. Okay? If you need to, in your delimitation, you can decide which parts of the areas you will be able to address and which ones you will not address. So there must be questions your research should find out. They are not questions your research participants should answer. This is something that I have seen people being confused about. Research questions are not questions that you will give to the participants in your study to answer. Research questions, get this, research questions are questions your study is trying to answer. Okay? So those questions will not be very many. I would say 3 to 5 for our purposes. They must be tied to your problem, to the variables and the relationship between the variables. So anybody who looks at your research questions and sees your research problem, they need to be able to see a direct correlation, a direct link to the research problem. So the research problem has to give birth to the research questions that you have. So they must be related, because the research questions are actually trying to find answers, trying to help you inquire into the research problem that you have. Now, suppose we have this central research question, which says, to what extent does the pastoral leadership style impact the congregational care at the Full Gospel Church? So this is the central research question. What would be possible sub-questions, research questions that we can have? One could be, to what extent do the members of the Full Gospel Church perceive to have experienced congregational care? This is a very important question. If you're trying to assess to what extent does the pastoral leadership style impact the congregational care of the Full Gospel Church, the first thing you want to know is, to what extent do the members of the church perceive to have experienced congregational care? So that will be one possible research question you could have. Another one is, to what extent do pastors perceive to exhibit transformational leadership style in their leadership behavior? So when we talk about leadership styles, we can look at two categories of it: transformational leadership style and transactional leadership style. So one of the research questions I could have is, to what extent do the pastors think that they are showing transformational leadership style? And of course, the other one will be, to what extent do the pastors perceive to exhibit transactional leadership style in the leadership behavior? So you want to see the pastors themselves, what kind of leadership do they think they are exhibiting? Is it transformational? Do they feel like they're exhibiting transactional? And to what extent do they feel? And another one could be, to what extent are there differences in the perceptions of the pastors about their own leadership behaviors when compared to the members of the congregation's perceptions of the pastor's leadership behavior? So this other question, what it does is it tries to compare. So the pastors have their own perception of their leadership style. And then you can ask questions from the congregation as well and ask, what kind of leadership style do they feel, do they perceive that the pastors are exhibiting? And you will see, you'll try to compare if there is a difference between the perception of the pastors and that of the congregational care. So these are some of the possible research questions, and they are all tied with the central research question, which is again related with your research problem. Another possible example: the benefits and challenge of using English language as a medium of instruction in children's academic performance in the case of selected private primary schools in Addis Ababa. Now, one of the questions, so obviously you can change this into a central research question, and you have the research question here, central research question. So that's the research problem, and we have the research question here, the central one. It would be, what are the benefits and challenges of using English language as a medium of instruction in children's academic performance in the case of selected private primary schools in Addis Ababa? So that is the central research question. Where did we get it from? We got it from by changing into a question the research problem. Now, possible research questions for that will be, what are the benefits of using English language as a medium of instruction in children's academic performance? That could be one question. And then the other one would be, what would be the challenge? So you don't want to collect only the benefits, but you may want to also collect challenges in using English language as a medium of instruction. And then another question will be, how does the use of English language as a medium of instruction benefit and challenge children's academic performance, or the lack of it? So this one, so you have research question that is trying to measure the benefits, and you have another research question which is helping you to measure the challenge, and then the third research question is one that helps you to see if there is a relationship between using English language and its benefit in children's academic performance, its benefit or in its challenge, in the challenge it poses to the academic performance of the students. So the third one is trying to relate it, to relate the two variables. So obviously, if you think of it, what is the independent variable, what is the dependent variable? You can pause and think for yourself for a minute. So you will see that academic performance is the dependent variable. It is the effect, and it is caused by the independent variable. In this case, it will be the usage of English language as a medium of instruction. So that's basically it, explaining what is a research question. So generally, you begin with your research problem. You are trying to find answers. You're trying to inquire into that problem. And one of the ways you do is you break that problem into sub-problems. or you change the research problem into a question, which gives you the central research question, and that one you break into smaller questions, which we call the research questions. The research questions are the questions that are trying to find answers to your study, meaning your study is trying to find answers to it. Okay, so the research questions are not questions that the participants are going to be answering, but the research questions are questions that your study is trying to answer, and it's all related with the research problem that you have. So I would like you to go look at the research problem that you have already identified. So if you would write your research problem and then change that into a central research question and see if you can come up with some, maybe 2 or 3 possible research questions related with your research problem. Okay, so once you have done that, I would like to ask you to post it on our Google Classroom.